It begins not in a palace, but in a marketplace. The year is 1350. The city, Cairo. The sun burns down on a courtyard paved with white stone. Beneath hanging cloth awnings, dozens of young women stand motionless, their wrists shackled in silver chains, their eyes lowered to the dust. An auctioneer walks among them, loudly announcing ages, ethnicities, and qualities. They are not criminals. They are not captives of war. They are merchandise. Women born in villages, ripped from families, and sold to the highest bidder under the protection of Islamic law. Most are between 10 and 20 years old, naked or half-dressed. Foreign tongues fall silent as they're examined like cattle. Teeth, hips, thighs, skin color, all openly measured for value. This wasn't an aberration. This was a system. From the 7th to the 19th century, for over 200 years, Islamic caliphates built and maintained the largest, most organized network of sexual slavery in human history. A system so entrenched, so legally justified, so economically essential that it outlasted dynasties, revolutions, and empires. At the heart of this system were the women, nearly 1 million of them, trafficked across continents. Their stories have been silenced, distorted, or erased. Until now, the justification was scriptural. Verse 424 of the Quran reads, "And those whom your right hand possesses." In Islamic jurisprudence, this phrase became a legal category, milk al-yamin. The slave women a Muslim man owned, he could have sexual relations with them without marriage, no consent required. And so, with divine sanction, the Caliphate formalized an empire-wide system where female slaves could be bought, sold, gifted, inherited, and used sexually. Slave women were not wives. They had no legal status. They could not refuse. Their children had no rights unless the father chose to acknowledge them, which he rarely did. But this wasn't hidden in shadows. It was public, institutionalized. The Abbasid caliphs of Baghdad, who ruled at the peak of Islamic power, were famous for their harems, enclosed palaces housing hundreds, sometimes thousands of slave women. Harun al-Rashid, celebrated in the Arabian Nights, kept over 2,000 concubines. His successors expanded it. The women came from everywhere: Persia, Armenia, Greece, Sudan, India, the Balkans. Any land touched by conquest was fair game. And when the Mongols stormed Baghdad in 1258, they found over 700 women in the caliph's harem, raped and slaughtered as the city burned. How did so many women end up here? The pipeline was vast and shockingly efficient. It started with conquest. When Islamic armies took new territories, enslaving the local population was standard. Women were separated from men, sorted by age and appearance, and either kept by soldiers or sent to markets in major cities: Damascus, Baghdad, Cairo, Istanbul. But war wasn't the only method. Slave traders scoured villages in Africa, Central Asia, and the Caucasus, capturing women and children in raids. Sometimes entire communities were depopulated. Other times, local leaders made deals, trading women for protection. From the 9th century onward, long-distance trade networks funneled women north from Africa and east from India. Ibn Battuta, the famous Moroccan traveler, describes in his journals a bustling slave market in Mali, with women sold for silk and spices. Some routes stretched thousands of miles, from the steppes of Ukraine to the palaces of Baghdad. One Arab chronicler proudly recorded how 30,000 Greek women were brought in after a single siege. They were categorized by price. The most beautiful, concubines for the elite. The rest, domestic slaves, breeders, or field workers. The least fortunate, prostitutes and state-run brothels. Yes, even prostitution was institutionalized. In many Islamic cities, slave brothels paid taxes to the state. For the women inside, life in the harem was gilded captivity. Imagine a palace behind thick walls, guards outside, silk rugs and marble baths inside, but no doors open outward. You belong to a man you didn't choose. You were renamed on arrival. You will never see your family again. Some concubines lived relatively luxurious lives. They were trained in music, dance, poetry, not for their own sake, but to please the master. Others lived in fear. One misstep, one failed pregnancy, one rival's whisper, and you were cast out, killed, or sold again. Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire, the conqueror of Constantinople, was said to have had 300 concubines. Many were never touched. They were just trophies. Others were used once, then forgotten. Children complicated things. A concubine who bore a son had elevated status, but daughters often discarded. Many babies born to concubines were quietly killed, sold, or absorbed into the system themselves. The harem was not a paradise of pleasure. It was a machine of control, psychological, sexual, and absolute. Not every woman submitted quietly. Throughout the centuries, countless enslaved women resisted, in silence, in sabotage, in survival. Some faked illnesses, others self-harmed to become less desirable. There are accounts, whispered through time, of concubines, poisoning abusive masters, setting fires in harems, even organizing escapes. But escape was rare. The punishment? Torture, death, or worse, public mutilation as a warning to others. Mothers sometimes scarred their daughters to protect them from capture. In Armenian villages under Ottoman rule, girls were burned with boiling oil or hidden in walls during slave raids. Other families fled into mountains or deserts when raiding parties approached entire communities, vanishing into exile, preferring starvation to slavery. But perhaps the most subtle form of resistance came from memory. Some women, even in captivity, secretly passed down their native language stories, prayers, whispering fragments of lost culture to their children. In doing so, they planted quiet seeds of defiance. The system wanted these women broken, physically, spiritually, genealogically, but many refused to vanish. When you imagine Islamic harems, you probably don't picture French or Italian girls. But from the 15th to 18th centuries, tens of thousands of European women were captured and trafficked into Muslim lands, part of a brutal system few Westerners learn about today. It was called the Barbary slave trade. North African corsairs, Muslim pirates backed by the Ottoman Empire, raided the coasts of Italy, Spain, France, and even England and Ireland. Entire towns were emptied overnight. In 1631, the village of Baltimore in Ireland was attacked. Over 100 women and children were taken in a single night. They were never seen again. Historians believe they ended up in Algiers, sold into sexual slavery. These were not rare events. Some estimates suggest that over 1.25 million Europeans were captured by Barbary slavers between the 16th and 18th centuries. European slave women fetched high prices in North Africa and the Middle East. Their skin color, hair, and features made them exotic, and therefore highly desirable for elite harems. In Ottoman Istanbul, Venetian girls were prized. In Morocco, blondes were preferred. In Cairo, Slavic women brought from Crimea sold for twice the price of locals. One French diplomat, visiting Algiers in 1709, described a slave auction where Christian girls were displayed naked, poked and examined like horses. The trauma of these abductions left deep scars in coastal Europe. Even today, songs and folktales survive in places like Sicily and Corsica, laments for daughters stolen by the Turks. By the 1800s, cracks began to show. The world was changing. Empires fell. European powers grew stronger. Abolitionist movements gained traction. But even as the transatlantic slave trade was being condemned, Islamic slavery continued quietly, stubbornly, and often with religious justification. The Ottoman Empire officially banned slavery in the 1840s. But in reality, the markets continued. In Mecca and Medina, enslaved women were sold until the early 1960s. Yes, you heard that right. The final abolition of legal slavery in Saudi Arabia came in 1962. Until then, African and Asian women were still being trafficked to serve as concubines and maids in elite households. The practice wasn't ancient history, it was living memory. And yet, unlike the Atlantic slave trade, there would be no global reckoning. No memorials, no museums, no national apologies, no school books. The sexual slavery of women in the Islamic world was quietly buried. So why don't we talk about this? Why is this massive system of exploitation almost invisible in modern discourse? The answer lies in a mix of fear, politics, and deliberate forgetting. Some historians avoid it, afraid of accusations of Islamophobia. Others dismiss it as normal for the time. Some say Western colonialism was worse, as if horror must be ranked. But the facts remain. Enslaved women were legally raped for over 1,000 years. This was done with religious justification, economic incentives, and imperial blessing. Their stories were recorded not by Western critics, but by Islamic chroniclers themselves. And most importantly, the women are gone. Their names, their voices, their pain, vanished beneath the sands of time. This is not just about the past. It's about what we choose to remember and what we deliberately forget. The sexual slavery of women under Islamic rule was not some dark secret. It was public policy, debated in courts, taxed by governments, justified in sermons, and its legacy still lingers. In parts of the modern world, the Milk al-Yaman justification is still cited. ISIS fighters in Syria and Iraq revived it, kidnapping Yazidi girls and selling them in open slave markets. In their own magazines, they quoted Quranic verses and medieval scholars, claiming they were merely reviving tradition. The horror isn't gone, it evolved. That's why these stories matter, because the past, when denied, returns in darker forms. And because the women who lived through this, who were bought, violated, discarded, deserve more than silence. They deserve remembrance,